In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. The case I have for you today is one I discovered during my ongoing research into Mike DeBardeleben and the unsolved 1969 murder of Dorothy Miller. If you've followed my previous episodes on that case, you know I've been searching for anything that could place DeBardeleben in Iowa in 1969. And so far, I haven't been able to find that connection. But while digging through old records and reports, I came across another unsolved murder in Iowa, one that happened just 2 years before Dorothy's death, and one that, decades later, some have speculated could also be tied to DeBardeleben. Now, before I began researching him, I hadn't heard of Mike DeBardeleben and knew little about the scope of his crimes. But the more I have learned, the more cautious I've become. Because investigators believe he may have murdered numerous women across multiple states, his name can sometimes become an easy answer in unsolved cases, simply because of how far-reaching his crimes were. In that way, I feel like he's often discussed in a similar way to Israel Keyes, someone whose movements and methods have led people to wonder whether he could be connected to countless other unsolved murders. Now, that doesn't mean that those theories are wrong, but I do think it means they deserve a little more scrutiny. And in this case, the short span of time between this murder and Dorothy Miller's raises questions worth exploring. Could these two cases be connected? DeBardeleben or not, could the same offender be responsible? Today, we are going to examine the unsolved murder of Leota Camp. Let's get started. I begin my research into cold cases usually the same way, by first digging through newspaper archives. I find it helpful to see how the public was being informed of a case in real time. You can see what information investigators were willing to put out, what they wanted to keep close to the chest, and how local media was painting the picture of the crime. And in this case, Monday, July 10th, 1967, was painted as a normal day for the Camp family. 25-year-old Ray Camp went to work, and his wife, Leota Camp, also 25 years old, spent the morning caring for their 3 children, 3-year-old Brenda, 4-year-old Kevin, and 3-month-old Christine, and tending to the home. They lived in Des Moines, Iowa, at 3213 Fleming Avenue. Their home on Fleming Avenue was a, quote, out-of-the-way street of well-kept single-family homes. Local news paints the neighborhood as being really safe. One article in the Des Moines Register by James Beaumont stated, quote, "Few people drive down the street who don't live there. Most of the families are young. Their children play in the street and the spacious lawns." Around 11 a.m., Leota's older children, Brenda and Kevin, were doing just that, playing in the yard. While they were playing, Leota had been doing laundry and was hanging up clothes to dry on their clothesline in the backyard. Now, at a certain point, again, around 11 a.m., Leota went inside the house. The kids continued playing outside, and Leota didn't come back out. After about an hour had gone by, the kids went inside to ask their mom to get them something to eat. And what those poor kids found was absolutely horrific. Their mom wasn't in the kitchen or living room, but rather in the front bedroom. The 2 children walked in and found their mother lying face down on the bed. She was bound and gagged, bloody, and had a knife sticking out of her back. Local news reports say Kevin took the knife out of his mother's back, and the 2 kids ran screaming to a neighbor, Mrs. Mary Grow. The children arrived yelling, quote, "Mommy's bleeding," a phrase that was printed and reprinted in almost every article published on this case. Mary ran to the camp home and found the state Leota was in, and I cannot imagine this is what she was expecting to find. Mary ran to another neighbor's home, Mrs. Nell Edwards, asking for help. In a Des Moines Tribune article published on Monday, July 10th, 1967, Nell said when Mary came to her home, she said, quote, "Come quick, something terrible has happened to Leota." The two rushed back to the camp home, and when they entered is when I believe it was first learned that, despite the horrific scene with Leota, 3-month-old Christine was completely fine. She was unharmed. They found her lying on a blanket on the living room floor, drinking from a bottle. Nell and Mary returned to Leota and could hear her moaning. They removed the gag from her mouth and began asking her questions, but she was unable to respond. The two called police. First responders rushed to the camp home and drove Leota to a nearby hospital, attempting to resuscitate her on the way. Despite the distance between their home and the hospital being really short, just a 7-minute drive, Leota was declared dead on arrival shortly before 1 p.m. Mary Groh told her husband Chuck to call Ray Camp at work. In a 2015 article by Mike Killen in the Des Moines Register, Ray said Chuck didn't want to tell him what had happened and would only say that there had been an accident with Leota and that he needed to go to the hospital. It was there that Ray learned his wife was dead and that she had been murdered. Now, let's go back and talk a little bit more about this crime scene. So, Leota was found lying face down on the bed. Her hands were tied behind her back and her legs were tied together at the ankles. Men's neckties belonging to Ray were used for both the ties on her hands and ankles and also for the gag in her mouth. An article in the Gazette published on July 11th, 1967 also says her neck was bound, but there's no further explanation I could find on whether it was attached to other bindings, how tight it was, anything like that. She was fully clothed, wearing a blouse, skirt, and shoes. Now, next to Leota's body was a bloody 6-inch kitchen knife. If you recall, Leota's son Kevin had removed the knife from her back and had then likely placed it next to her on the bed before running to get the neighbor. Police also found a second kitchen knife on the bedroom floor, but the second knife found was just the blade, which was 4 inches long. It was missing its handle, and police never found it. Now, both of these knives were kitchen knives, and they belonged to the set in the camp's kitchen. The home itself was unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry. News reports do say that on that day it was hot and muggy, and that families would routinely leave their doors and windows open to let some air come through. Now, I haven't found anything saying specifically whether the camp's front door was open that morning or shut, but what I do know is that it was unlocked and that there was no sign of forced entry. In the home, there was no furniture out of place, nothing was broken, nothing was out of place really at all. There didn't appear to be a struggle in the home. Additionally, there was nothing noted missing from the home. Now, in the kitchen, there was another basket of wet laundry that needed to be hung up. In articles I read, there was no mention if any other blood, whether large amounts or just droplets, were found anywhere else in the home. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't find anything, but there was just no public reporting on that. An autopsy showed there was no sign that Leota had been sexually assaulted. There were no bruises, scratches, or scrapes on her. There were no defensive wounds reported. To investigators, this, paired with the lack of evidence of a struggle in the home, led them to believe that she was probably surprised by the offender, that he probably threatened to hurt the baby if she screamed or struggled in any way. Dr. Leo Luca, the Polk County medical examiner, said Leota had been stabbed 4 times in the back, and that the wounds penetrated her lungs. He noted she had died of internal hemorrhaging. The stab wounds, described by Dr. Luca in an article published in the Des Moines Register, were in a straight line along her spinal column, about 1 inch apart, with the highest wound being about 7 inches below her neck. The wounds were inflicted with the 2 different kitchen knives found at the scene. Immediately following the murder, Ray Camp and the 3 children began staying with Leota's sister, and they never returned to their Fleming Avenue home. Ray spoke with reporter Norman Brewer of the Des Moines Tribune in an article published on September 13th, 1967. In it, he said, quote, "I don't know how staying in the house would have affected the children. They'd be going into the bedroom where they found their mother. I don't think the two children will ever forget it. The boy still remembers exactly what he had for breakfast that day, everything. He talks about it a lot, and the doctor says that's good. Brenda doesn't like to have you talk about it." Ray ended up arranging to have a trailer home delivered and parked near his in-laws so they could move in. He thought that might help bring a little more stability to their family. Leota was eventually laid to rest in Missouri, where she was from, and in the weeks and months following the murder, Ray was able to come up with $2,500 in reward money, which mostly came from his own savings. He said he wasn't out for revenge, but wanted the man brought to justice. He said someone capable of committing such a violent act would probably do it again. The investigation into Leota's murder was very quick to begin, and the biggest leads of the investigation came from interviewing neighbors. One neighbor confirmed that they had seen Leota outside in the backyard hanging up laundry, though I haven't found a specific time. But this, paired with the basket of wet laundry in the kitchen, I think it shows that whatever happened occurred in the middle of her completing that chore. More importantly, though, multiple neighbors said they saw a man walk into and leave the camp home right during the time frame the murder would have occurred. One neighbor said that around 11 a.m., she saw a young man park his car on the street, not directly in front of the camp home, but a little ways down. He got out, walked across the camp's front yard, and entered the house. Then, just minutes before noon, another neighbor said they saw a man leave the home, walk to the car, get in, and drive away. He was described as a white male, 20 to 30 years old. Some articles say he had a fair complexion, but more articles describe him as having a, quote, good tan. They describe him as being about 5 foot 8 inches tall, with a stocky build, wearing a brown and white plaid shirt and dark pants. A lot of reporting described him as being handsome and with brown curly hair. Now, based on the descriptions of the young man from witnesses, a composite sketch was made and released to the public, along with a call for anyone who knew the man, and the man himself, to come forward so police could talk with him. A majority of the effort in the investigation, I believe, went into trying to find out who this man was and trying to track down his vehicle. Witnesses said he was driving a dark blue or black Mustang. It's described in an article by Julie Zelenka in the Des Moines Register. The article says, quote, "The auto sought by police is a fastback Ford Mustang, which has a roof that slopes to the trunk in a long sweep. It is a 1965 or 1966 models, with louvers on the upper portion of the car behind the doors. Detective Robert Weichman said the louvers on the car being sought are flush with the outside portion of the car. In some models of the vehicle, the louvers protrude." Now, by the time that article was published, which was a little over a month following Leota's murder, police had tracked down and checked dozens of similar Mustangs. Detective Weichman said, quote, "As far as we know, we haven't yet talked with the driver of the vehicle seen near the camp home the day of the murder." They asked the public to come forward if they owned a car matching that description, but perhaps left it with a friend or had it in an auto shop. They also asked that anyone who knows another person with a similar car who maybe left town unexpectedly or something like that. They wanted those people to come forward too. An article published in the Des Moines Tribune on July 11th, 1967, reports that the day after the murder, in the search for that Mustang, police ended up sealing off entrances and exits at the Des Moines Municipal Airport. This came after an unidentified caller claimed that his car had been sideswiped by a black Mustang, and that the driver sped away, ran into the airport, and boarded a plane. Now, a check of the airport parking lot and nearby streets found no trace of this Mustang. After this, the police actually delayed one of the flights flying out of the Des Moines airport. It was United Airlines Flight 405. And they delayed it for about 5 minutes while a detective searched the passengers. The plane was apparently headed for Omaha and then Los Angeles, and the plane ends up taking off at 8:20 a.m. Now, as far as the collected evidence goes, the 2 murder weapons were left at the scene, except for the handle of the 4-inch kitchen knife, which, like I said, was apparently never recovered. At the time, police declined to say whether fingerprints had been found on the knives or elsewhere in the home. I haven't found anything in old articles or in more recent ones indicating whether they had collected any DNA or blood, and there was no mention of any sort of testing done on any of the evidence they had. Though with this being the 60s, obviously forensic testing was limited. Investigators' theory at the time was that the offender, who investigators described as a, quote, kook and or pervert, entered the Camp home while she was in the back hanging laundry on the clothesline. They speculated that Leota came into the house quicker than the perpetrator maybe expected, causing him to panic and kill her. They said they believe the killer had Leota lie down on the bed. He tied her arms around her back, tied her ankles and her neck with those neckties. He then placed another tie in her mouth as a gag. They believe he then went into the kitchen, retrieved a knife, and came back to stab her. Now, because there were 2 knives used, and one of them was broken, they assumed he tried stabbing her with the 4-inch knife, which broke, causing him to then go back to have to get another one. But I'll say again, there was no mention of any blood in any other parts of the house, and the witnesses who saw the man walking back to the car didn't mention seeing any blood on him. And I would expect, if you stab someone, the knife breaks, you have to walk back to the kitchen. I find it hard to believe that they would have been able to do that without getting any additional blood somewhere else in the house. And again, this just hasn't been reported on. They definitely could have found extra blood in the house. I just haven't seen that reported anywhere. Now, what investigators have never been able to determine is what the motive of this murder was. They repeatedly say that because she wasn't sexually assaulted, they didn't believe it was a sex crime. They also said that because nothing was stolen from the home, they believed that ruled out robbery. They theorized, though, that if robbery was the motive and he intended to steal from the home while she was out in the backyard, but came in sooner than anticipated, he perhaps thought his only option was to kill her because she had gotten too good a look at his face. If that's the case, though, some have wondered, does that suggest that she maybe knew the killer? Or he was at least someone familiar to the neighborhood? But even then, to commit a crime like this, even if the intent was originally just robbery, in the middle of the day, in a neighborhood you'd be familiar with, is incredibly brazen and stupid. There was also no report of any neighbor witnesses recognizing him. And based on the timing of witnesses seeing the man, he was there for an hour. What was he doing for all of that time? Though the fact that the man used knives and ties from the camp home rather than weapons he brought himself, I don't know, maybe that does suggest that the intent wasn't murder. An article in the Des Moines Tribune published on September 13th, 1967 has a quote from Detective Cletus Leeming. He said, quote, "Another thing that makes this case so tough is that most murders are committed by people closely associated with the victim. In this case, this doesn't appear to be true. We had at least a dozen good, strong suspects, but our investigation eliminated them one by one." There are comments in articles that Iowa authorities coordinated with authorities in Missouri to check on any leads that could relate to Leota's hometown in the state. Additionally, there are no comments suggesting Ray ever was considered a suspect, and it was said that they confirmed he was at work at the time. Now, the investigation continues, interviews continue, and eventually it's learned that in the weeks before her murder, Leota had received a, quote, obscene phone call. Ray said that about a week or two before the 4th of July, Leota had been at home feeding the baby when the phone rang. She put the baby down, answered the phone, and a man was on the other line and said, quote, "Where you been?" Leota had described this to Ray after the fact and said that the man had a, quote, strange tone of voice. But she wondered at first if it was maybe one of their friends kidding around with her, so she said she'd been feeding the baby. Ray went on to tell the Register, quote, "She told the caller she had been feeding the baby, and the man replied, 'I thought maybe you were ... and then in parentheses it says, using an obscene expression." Ray said, quote, "I won't even say the word he used over the phone." Ray described Leota as being shocked and spellbound following the call. She didn't recognize the voice and pretty quickly hung up on him. Now, Ray said their phone number wasn't even in the phone book, so he wasn't sure how this guy got their number unless it was just someone who randomly dialed a house. There was a comment, though, on the Iowa Cold Cases write-up on this case from a man who said he grew up in the neighborhood and lived there at the time of the murder. He said he was, I think, 9 or so at the time. And he said, quote, "Oddly, several neighbor ladies, my mom included, had received obscene phone calls before this. Some received the calls after." I haven't seen any media reports of this, but it would be an interesting avenue to look into. Investigators received hundreds, if not thousands, of calls in the weeks and months following Leota's murder. They followed up on hundreds of leads. They searched high and low for the man and the Mustang, but eventually the case went cold. Despite the huge amount of coverage there was on Leota's murder in 1967, there was very, very little in the years that followed. Some articles in the years following the murder with brief mentions of Leota's case were in stories highlighting what authorities described as a prowler problem in Des Moines. There were other murders and assaults in the years following, and a few before, that had similar aspects to Leota's, mainly the fact that they were stabbings, though there was no explicit mention from law enforcement that they had linked her murder to any of the others that they were talking about. Ray said in an interview with Mike Killen in 2015 that eventually the family tried to move on, and they rarely talked about the murder. He said, quote, "I was angry for a long time, and then maybe drank more than I should. Then I figured out that wasn't going to do anything for my children or me. I got over it and buried myself in my work, and tried to spend as much time as I could with the children." Ray remarried in 1970 and died in 2024 without knowing what happened to Leota. Leota's daughter Brenda also spoke to Mike Killen in 2015 and talked about her memories of that time, sitting on her father's lap when she learned her mother was gone, the numbness, and how she really only has stories from others about her mother's life to remember her by. She said in that interview that it wasn't until she got older and had children of her own that the weight of what happened to her mother began to affect her. She eventually decided to obtain the large police file, though it hasn't brought her any answers. In this 2015 article, there's also a short mention of a woman named Carol Weatherich, who said she lived a few houses away from the camps. She said on the day of the murder, she had a babysitter watching her children while she left to go buy a new car. She said when she got back, the babysitter told her what happened to Leota. She said she thinks of it every day, and that she believes she was the intended target. Carol, who eventually moved to Minnesota, said in the article that she was convinced that it was a hitman who intended to kill her, but went to the wrong home. She said she had a gut feeling at that time in her life that she was in danger, that she had gotten a German Shepherd dog for protection. She said in 2011, quote, she went to police with the story and the incriminating details and was told instead they'd been checking with people Camp went to school with. Now, that is the only mention of this story from Carol. I have a lot of questions about it, and I've tried to track her down to get more information on this story, but I haven't been able to find her. Now, beyond local news reporting, I always try to get official statements or records, but it's tough with cold cases. In Iowa, many case files aren't releasable if the case is still open, but I did reach out to the Des Moines Police Department, asking about the status of the investigation, if there have been any recent case reviews, testing, or retesting of evidence, and as of this recording, they haven't gotten back to me. I was also able to find Mrs. Groh and Brenda, and reached out to them. but as of this recording, they haven't responded to my messages. So beyond that, it was in this 2015 interview where I found this very slight Mike DeBardelibin connection. Really, it just mentions that someone had called Brenda suspecting that he was responsible. And in the comment section of Leota's case on iowacoldcases.org, there is a man in there who is adamant that Mike DeBardelibin was responsible. And the man made comments around 2015 and brought up that the sketch of the suspect in Leota's case looks very similar to the sketch released in Dorothy's case 2 years later. And I do agree with that, right? Like, while both of the sketches are pretty generic, there are definite similarities in the eyebrows, the eyes, the nose, hairline, and the ears. And I don't know, in terms of the similarities between the actual murders of the two women, really the only similarities are that they were both bound and stabbed. There are definitely more differences between these two cases than there are similarities. For one, Dorothy knew her murderer, in a sense. She was a realtor and had actually met with the client, who called himself Robert Clark, previously, and was showing him the vacant home where she was murdered. In Leota's case, we still don't know if there was any previous interaction between the two. I've seen no reports of neighbors having previously seen the man or his vehicle in their neighborhood before that day. Additionally, the killer in Dorothy's case brought the murder weapon and the bindings he used. The murder weapon in her case was never found. In Leota's case, the knives used and the bindings were all items from her own home, suggesting the perpetrator brought nothing with him. In terms of actual wounds, Dorothy had 23 stab wounds and Leota had 4. Dorothy had been sexually assaulted, but Leota hadn't. One thing that stuck out to me, the client, Robert Clark, in Dorothy's case, said that he was from Des Moines, Iowa, and was moving to Burlington, which is why he was there having Dorothy show him a home. That, plus the similarities between the two composite sketches, does make me wonder if there's a connection, but there's also just so many differences that I feel like it's unlikely. Now, back to DeBardelibin. Mike DeBardelibin didn't follow a strict MO. He did have groups of crimes that were very similar in nature, but overall, his crimes were extremely varied. He did target realtors, but he also routinely posed as a law enforcement officer. He would kidnap women multiple times and let them go. There were also multiple instances where he is alleged to have kidnapped someone to hold for ransom, specifically targeting managers of banks and then obviously his counterfeiting operations. Now, all of that to say, despite the big differences between the two cases, I don't think that necessarily rules out DeBardelibin because his crimes were so varied. But I don't know. It's just hard to tell. And the man in the comments who was adamant that DeBardelibin was the perpetrator was kind of like pushing this idea in a way that was a little unsettling. His comments come off as very pushy, and he's giving this I know something everyone else doesn't vibe. In one comment, he says something like, quote, "Okay, I have finally decided to reveal who killed Leota," which is just kind of a weird thing to say. Brenda and Camp actually had commented on this forum around the 2015 timeframe, trying to get more information from him. And ultimately, though, we don't know if Mike DeBardelibin was responsible. It's possible. And I have submitted tips to the Iowa Cold Case Unit with information on DeBardelibin as he may relate to Dorothy Miller's case, and I have a pending FOIA request with the U.S. Secret Service. But right now, I haven't been able to find anything definitively placing him in the state of Iowa, ever. I'm hoping that if my FOIA request comes back, I can either place him in Iowa or rule him out completely. Now, this case leaves me with so many questions. Like, what does it say that he used knives and ties from the camp home? Did he have any other weapon with him, like a gun that he used to threaten Leota? Did neighbors report any sort of vehicle in the area in the weeks before the murder? Is it possible he was stalking or surveilling the area for potential targets? Were there any boyfriends of Leota's or men she had rejected, causing them to target her? And was there any report that in the weeks prior, or any sort of feeling from Leota, that anything had been moved or was out of place in the home? I'd want to know if there were any burglaries in the area, and if it would be worth it to go back and review some of those suspects that they ruled out. Now, again, I reached out to both the Des Moines Police Department and sent a message to both Brenda and Mrs. Groh. If they get back to me with any sort of update, or if they're willing to tell their story and their memories, I will publish an updated episode on this. If you have any information at all on the murder of Leota Camp, please contact the Iowa Cold Case Unit. Their information will be in the description of this episode. That's all I have for you today, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.